Hey there, welcome to my new dance podcast, Hey Dancer. I feel like I just said hey twice. I said hey there, and then my podcast is called Hey Dancer. See, now to me that's redundant. And I'm saying hey too much in just the first 4 seconds of my show. So now I got to come up with, I think, a new greeting like, hi, welcome to my podcast, Hey Dancer. That's better, right? Hi and then hey. Oh, just bear with me here, everyone. I'm a former professional teenage dancer who decided to return to dance 3 decades later. And in another digression, you're welcome, I often say ex-protein dancer. And I realize that that might sound bizarre, like I'm talking about the food metric. What kind of a dancer is an ex-protein dancer? Like an ex-high-calorie dancer? I don't know. All right, let's get down to business here. This conversation today is about that time I took a dance class where we did the combination to a certain song by a certain pop star, and the teacher invited said pop star to class to watch, and they showed up. I'm hoping that by me sharing the story, especially by the end, that it somehow serves, especially maybe this time teachers, dance teachers. I don't know, I think there are lessons here, and it could hopefully be in some ways constructive. And that is what my goal is, by the way, with my show all the time, is just to inspire by whatever it is I'm sharing. Before we get into all of that, if you would take a moment and help a new podcaster out by rating, reviewing, following, subscribing, sharing, depending where you're watching or listening, because again, this podcast is available to watch in video format on both Spotify and YouTube, and listen Apple and everywhere else. So, okay. Thanks in advance for that. It is really, really appreciated. Okay, now let's get to the story. But before we get to the story, I need to preface this because it's important to me. I don't gossip. I don't drop names of a teacher, for example, where my experience in the class was not a good one. And I am perhaps ranting or sharing something about a class that I just did not agree with, or any of the above. It's just not my style. This has been a sort of dictum, if you will, of mine since I began documenting this return to dance. I remember way back in 2019 taking a couple of classes in Orange County, and I was really venting because I struggled a lot, and it was always crucial to me to never mention a teacher's name in that scenario. And the same philosophy of mine holds true today. So I'm not mentioning the teacher's name. I am not mentioning the pop star's name. And what's interesting about my stories that I've shared on social media is that they're not often, I would say exclusively about classes that happened way in the past, like years ago, because it just turned out that that's when I began sharing my journey. So I'd already had a lot of dance class experience in the can, kind of archived, waiting to be released into the world. There's no way anybody could infer whom I'm speaking of. And I even go to greater lengths. For example, in my docuseries, where let's just say I'm covering a certain, period of time, let's just say spring of 2022. I very, very intentionally, when I am, right after class, voicing my frustration, that story will be nowhere near footage from that class. I put everything out there in a way very deliberately so that you cannot know of whom I am speaking. And because my intention is not to gossip, and this is my dance experience through my lens, and my lens may be very, very different than a fellow dancer's lens in the exact same class. Okay, if you're expecting any juiciness here, with regard to name dropping, it's not going to happen. But I promise the story is still pretty good. Editor Miller here. One thing I realized before we get to the main story, the reason all the dance footage is older, so old that you could never figure out, who the teacher is if I don't tell you who it is not just that I've been sitting on the footage for years. It's also that in the last 2 years, I've been on a healing journey, so I don't even have any super current dance footage. I happened to release my project at a time I was healing, and I'm still healing, hence no new dance footage. But when I do get back in class, I will continue this particular practice, which is that when I share a moment from dance class and the experience was less than positive, I will publish it months after the class occurred and or nowhere near footage from that class. Okay, now back to the story. Bloop, 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 bloop. Millennium, one of the hottest studios, in the world, really, a global recognizable brand, the iconic red wall. And I moved to LA to really study there the most. And so this was during 2021, actually, so this does go back. See, again, you can't figure out who it is. This was at a really awkward time for all dancers. It was when studios were not open, and then Millennium had opened and closed and opened again. I had not been dancing at all, I moved to LA for this dance project, and I took, in 2020, so much, like without exaggeration, 80 classes between January and March, and then we know what happened, and then like no dancing at all. And now 2021, and I heard Millennium had opened for a bit, and I was like, okay, I gotta take a class. And I honestly think I took 2 or 3 classes in person in all of 2021. And I remember this teacher's class was very, very challenging for me. And the teacher themselves, I'm going to try, I may slip, to be gender neutral here. Anyway, I remember the teacher would often talk about their class being a push. And that was the first time I had heard, I think, that term with regard to, dance class being a challenge or something. This particular class was not very big, not more than a dozen of us in class. And the teacher opened class by saying that they invited the pop star to class and they were probably going to show up. Now, I remember this was a jazz class. While the class size was very small, that there was also another guy in class. As a male dancer growing up and being the only guy in class so many times, I'm just used to it. It just feels like my norm. This is more for jazz versus hip hop. And there was another guy in this class. And I remember thinking like, oh, wow, okay, it's not just me today. Okay, so you can judge me for this if you want. When there are other guys in a jazz class, I'm always very kind of, I don't want to say competitive, but almost in a healthy way comparing, like, oh, I wonder if their technique is like better than mine. I wonder if their jumps, their kicks, their turns, their flexibility, whatever. And I kind of compare. It's probably like a healthy competitive thing. I don't feel judgmental about it. If I see someone, a guy who is better than I am at, whatever particular thing, like they have a certain trick, I'm like, oh, gosh, I want to learn that trick too. So anyway, I noticed pretty quickly that this guy somehow was even more beginning than me in class. My journey in my return to dance has often been so, almost befuddling, because I walk this sort of dichotomy of literally convene back-to-back classes and be a star in a class. And the teacher will call me out to like point things out and to demonstrate things. And then I can take a class, without exaggeration, 4 seconds later, like the next class, and have 2 left feet and I can't do a damn thing. And that's just a strange position to be in. I don't know if that is too relatable, but that has very much been my journey in this return to dance. And this was one of those classes for me where I was really just falling on my face. However, the teacher did say, because it was the height of the pandemic and classes were just kind of opening again, I think just for a moment though, because they closed down like right after this, I think. This choreography was traveling, it was jazz, and not all jazz, by the way, travels in class these days. The teacher was super lovely and talked a lot about the fact that most of us have not been dancing because of, again, studios being closed. And if you have been dancing, it's from home in very limited, tiny spaces. And if you're doing choreo, you're probably not moving and traveling. And by the way, if you're wondering how I remember this so well, it's because I did record the story at the time, but the video footage is not good. And because my podcast is both video and audio, I decided to just kind of retell the story. But I did listen to it just a bit ago, so it's very, very fresh in my mind. Because you can trust, ain't no way in hell I remember the minutia of what every teacher has said in every class the last whatever many years. So yeah, the teacher talked about the fact that it's going to be really hard because our bodies are and our muscles haven't been like moving and really traveling, and they again talked about it being very challenging and really a push. It seemed to me that the dancers in class, aside from the guy, were very professional. They were clearly working dancers. They knew each other. They were talking about jobs they booked together, that kind of pre-class chatter that I was hearing. So the class begins and the teacher tells us that this pop star may show up. And the pop star did and came very early, much to the teacher's surprise. This teacher loved doing across the floor, which was very, very rare, but they did not do across the floor in this class because they wanted to get right into the combination as the pop star showed up and give us as much time to work on it and, make the pop star just kind of excited, their music and watching the choreo and all of that. Well, I noticed very, very quickly that the choreo was way above my pay grade, but I stuck it through. Like, I did not give up as I had in the past. I didn't sit out of groups. I really kept pushing. I kept trying. And you know what? I had moments of magic. I had moments, like 4 counts here, 2 counts there, where I felt very good. But for the most part, I was kind of a train wreck, although I always had a sense of where the choreo was moving, like, okay, this is where we're moving a few steps up, we're moving to the left. I always had an idea of the direction, I guess, even if the movement, like the micro movements and all of that, I was honestly pretty lost a lot of the time. The teacher is teaching at a way quicker rate than they normally do because they wanted to get the combination on camera and get groups and solos and get themselves, the teacher themselves, doing a solo many times, because again, the pop star is there. This is like amazing footage. The pop star may share it. What's interesting is that I really wanted to leave and I thought really seriously about taking off. And then all of a sudden I noticed that the other guy, he wasn't there anymore. I never saw him leave, but he took off. He probably took off around the time the pop star showed up. He was like, nah, I'm out of here. Because again, if I were struggling, he was really, really struggling. There was just a lot of, even though the teacher's vibe was warm, it just felt very high stakes. How could it not? And this particular studio had 2 doors. I remember leaning against one of the doors in the back of the room, and I just kind of played with the knob for a second, and it was locked. And I felt it would be way too awkward as the class was progressing, that it might be as if I were making a scene if I walked out through the main door. Anyway, I just stuck it through. I really, really tried my best. The reason I think this story, I want to share it, is because of what happened next, which felt like, to me at the time, a really big deal. This particular teacher and their style kind of had all the ingredients that, for me, made up a recipe of a lot of struggle. The choreography was very, very fast. It was very dense, meaning that there was a ton of movement in minimal counts, right? It was like, and 1, and 2. Is so much movement that they pack in now into just a couple of counts. It was, while it traveled a lot, it was also very upper body heavy, which for some reason confuses my brain sometimes, especially when it's taught quickly, especially when there are endless counts of 8. And clearly the teacher was trying to impress the pop star with, their choreography. The more of their choreography there is, well, the better, I guess, or something. And so by the time we actually got into groups, which I feel like was about the last 20 minutes of class, and again, this was a small class, so how many groups could there be? There were just 2 groups. It was like a group of 6 and a group of 5. I was in the group of 5. And, we performed it, a couple of times, but then it became about what happens a lot at really trendy LA studios, the teacher themselves performing the combination as a soloist. And this time it's, heightened because the pop star of the freaking song is there. So it's like show off time, right? And so many times the teacher is doing a solo. Well, I don't want to exaggerate. When I say many, 4 times. That's kind of a lot. So we do it in groups, maybe just a couple of times, and a couple other dancers are selected to do solos and duets and whatever. Ultimately, I'm up in groups not more than a couple of times in my group. Again, there's 5 of us. And the class is over, and honestly, I run out of there as fast as possible. And then I noticed later on that day, because I checked, because the pop star was filming. And I checked the pop star's stories, and there I was on the stories, not dancing. I was, on the sidelines with a mask, no less, because again, pandemic. Oh my God, it's so hard to dance with a mask on. That's a whole other story. But anyway, the pop star had on their own stories the teacher dancing to the pop star's music, a solo. And I remember thinking, well, the teacher got what they wanted. I guess that class experience served the teacher really, really well. Not the students so much. It was just kind of funny. I remember seeing myself in the background just, I just didn't really have, I wasn't like cheering on. I was just standing there like very still watching. I probably wasn't too happy. And then I noticed that the teacher put on their Instagram a carousel. So multiple slides of the dance class. And showed themselves doing the choreography, showed the pop star like in the class, showed the group of 6 dancing. All the dancers were filmed like they were all in the shot. They showed duets of the choreo. And then the very last slide in this carousel from class was my group. And what did the teacher do when filming and kind of walking around, with the iPhone and angling the camera? Worked very, very hard to deliberately cut me out of the footage. I'm the only dancer from that class who was very specifically cut from the footage. And you can see like my arm a couple of times. My arm looked really good, by the way. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, and I remember that it didn't bother me. And it didn't hurt me. I remember I thought a couple of things. 1, I understand intellectually, I understand artistically, business-wise, emotionally, why a teacher would only want dancers who are crushing their choreo, and the other dancers in my group were crushing. Oh, and by the way, I had looked up all the dancers from class. Come on, you do this too, right? Because, I could see them being tagged and I can see them commenting, and all of them were like major working professional dancers with many thousands of followers. And at the time I had no followers. I mean, I hadn't even publicly debuted my, return to dance journey on social media, but I had suspected correctly. They were all like literal geniuses. And then there was me. So I understand from a business perspective why a choreographer, why a dance teacher would want to have their choreo living online served to the utmost best capacity ever. Because it is ultimately your work. It is your brand. It is what you are trying to market. You want to get jobs. You want to be a working choreographer. You want it to shine and to live so beautifully out into the world. And if you have dancers, really effing it up, like that doesn't really serve you, right? So I totally get that. My brain was thinking that. But here was my most, overriding thought was the teacher is a fool. Like, this is not smart. You already have you crushing the choreography as a soloist. That's kind of like, it can end right there. That's it. You have that. It's amazing. And then you have you and the pop star, chit-chatting, in another slide. Okay, now we know, like, that's impressive. Like, that's a lot right there too, isn't it? And then we have multiple slides of other dancers crushing the choreography, groups, duets, solos. That's all amazing. And then you have, on the very last slide, a group with one dancer fighting for his life, like showing up, making an effort. Like, why wouldn't you want to show that? Your class has maybe all levels in there. we've seen already a lot of people crushing. We know what the combination with the choreography is supposed to look like, you know? So you can't show one guy who's really struggling. Isn't it common sense that other dancers who are watching this footage are going to feel like, of all levels, like some advanced and some very basic in beginning, are going to feel comforted that there's a guy in class who's struggling? Like, I would really love to see that a lot more on social media. That would really resonate with me, for me. It would make me want to show up to that class, to be like, wow, everybody is welcome. You can be amazing and you can be crappy that day. It doesn't matter. This is a no judgment zone. And maybe that's what it is. It felt a little judgmental. No, you weren't good enough to be shown on my IG. And what that moment did for me, I think more than anything and everything, is kind of feel sorry for the teacher, that they didn't have that, I guess, compassion, but more than that, the wisdom to know better. That watching a dancer fighting for their life on there is actually probably encouraging and would really serve a lot more dancers. And not just the genius professional dancers who apparently crush every freaking dance class they take. Editor Miller popping in here again. So as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, you know, I can see somebody listening to this, watching this, and having the perspective of, you know, maybe the dance teacher was ironically being compassionate in this moment. Maybe they were trying to protect me by not showing me to the world on IG, knowing that I was struggling, thinking that it might, I don't know, embarrass me, make me, you know, just protect me from not being seen in a better light, I guess. And to that, I would say the teacher very deliberately filmed my group, excluding me. I wasn't cropped out in editing. I was actually filmed cropped out, meaning my position in the group was at the far left, and the teacher was filming as they were walking, kind of panning the group as they were filming, and their iPhone was very purposely angled to constantly be cutting me out. So my point is, I was never in the shot to begin with. The teacher kept angling the camera with me outside of the frame. And I guess I'll just end with what maybe I said in the beginning, is I hope that any dance teacher out there who might be listening, if you find yourselves in a situation like this and you're really tempted to only show those students in class who are just crushing your stuff, I totally get it. I really, really do. But it would really, I think, serve the dance world, especially in this day and age where we just see perfection, if you did take a moment, you know, maybe at the end of a video, on that 8th slide or something, you know, those dancers who are really trying and maybe they're not killing it, but they showed up, and that's a big deal. If you enjoyed this podcast and my retelling of the story, if it was in any way, I don't know, useful, informative, for you, share it with a dance friend. That would go a long way. And don't forget to rate, review, share, and follow and subscribe, again, depending where you're watching or listening. All right, until next time, thanks for being here.